On a rainy Saturday evening in late July, I stood on the front porch of a house I legally owned, staring at my 35-year-old son, Roger, who was blocking the doorway with both arms spread wide. The Salem rain came down in steady, cold sheets, soaking through my jacket, but I barely felt it. Roger looked down at me, his face tight. "Dad, don't come in," he yelled. "My wife's family is here. You need to leave." I stood frozen on the porch of 412 Delmare Street, a house I had bought with my own savings, where my son and his wife had lived rent-free for 6 years. Before I could say a word, he pulled the heavy wooden door shut. I stood in the dark for a long minute, looking at the closed door of my own property. Then I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and called my attorney on speaker. That single call was about to set off a chain of events that would strip every bit of color from Roger's face. But at that moment, I was just a father standing in the rain, trying to understand how my own blood could lock me out. My name is Walter Harrington. I am 65 years old. For 31 years, I worked for the Salem Water Authority as the head of maintenance and safety compliance. If you spend 3 decades in that line of work, you learn a few things about how systems operate. My entire job was about precision. When a pipe is under pressure, it doesn't fail all at once. There are always tiny cracks, small drops of moisture, minor shifts in pressure before the main line bursts. You have to train your eyes to see the details that most people ignore. I was a man who noticed things. I checked the pressure gauges twice. I double-checked the seals. Yet, when it came to my own family, I missed every single warning sign until the entire structure collapsed around us. I retired 2 years ago with a decent pension and a paid-off home at 1847 Creekside Drive. My wife, Margaret, whom everyone calls Marge, is 62. She spent 24 years as the head secretary at Hoover Elementary School. Marge can calm down a crying 8-year-old, handle a furious school principal, and organize a district-wide supply shipment in 10 minutes without ever raising her voice. She has quiet brown eyes that go completely flat when she is angry. After 38 years of marriage, I've learned that Marge's flat stare is far more dangerous than any shouting match. We married in Milwaukee when she was 24 and I was 26, building a steady, quiet life together. Our son, Roger, is 35. He inherited my jawline and Marge's stubborn nature, which served him well in school but eventually led him down a dark road. 6 years ago, Roger married Clara Wexler. Clara is 33, a sharp paralegal at Reyes and Harmon, a prominent law firm in downtown Salem. She was the kind of daughter-in-law who always remembered Marge's birthday, color-coded her calendar, and brought fresh flowers every time she visited our home. When they announced plans to open the Copper Harbor Inn, a historic 18-room boutique hotel in Salem, I was incredibly proud. I drove past it twice a week just to look at the sign and feel the pride of knowing my son was building a legacy. To help them get started, I bought a second property, the house at 412 Delmare Street. It was a cozy 3-bedroom place, just 10 minutes away from Creekside Drive. I told Roger he and Clara could live there rent-free so they could focus all their financial resources on building the hotel. I kept the deed in my name. That wasn't because I didn't trust them. It was simply a habit of mine. Clean paperwork makes for clean relationships. For the first few years, our life was peaceful. Dennis Vance, 66, retired from the Postal Service and built like an old linebacker, was the only person outside of Marge I trusted completely. We'd sit on the porch, Marge would bring snacks, and we'd talk for hours. Roger and Clara joined us for Sunday dinners, though those visits thinned as the hotel grew. I assumed they were just busy building their dream, but looking back, the warning signs started appearing in February. It began with a phone call from Roger on a cold Sunday afternoon. I was in the garage, pretending to organize my tools, while Marge was in the kitchen preparing a pot roast. Roger called on our old landline, which Marge insists on keeping because she says cell phones are fine for information, but not for actual conversation. "Hey, Dad." Roger's voice was casual. "Just checking in. Quick question for you. Have you and Mom ever thought about setting up a living trust?" I wiped my hands on a rag. "A living trust? We have wills, Roger. Done years ago. They cover everything. Wills go through probate, Dad," he said smoothly. "A trust is cleaner. Clara sees it all the time at her law firm. Families who don't plan ahead end up court for years. You guys aren't getting any younger, And with the Creekside house and Del Mar property, it's just smart to get things in order. I'll think about it, I replied. Yeah, just something to consider, he said warmly before hanging up. I didn't think about it again for weeks. That night, Dennis came over and pulled the tab on his beer. You hear from Roger lately? He asked. Called today, I said, asking about living trusts. Dennis nodded slowly. He's been quiet lately, haven't seen him around much. Marge says the same. I don't mean to make something out of nothing. He's busy, I shrugged. The hotel has them busy. Dennis gave me that look he uses when he disagrees, but took a long gulp of his beer instead of speaking. I should have paid attention to that quiet moment. The second sign came in early March. A woman from a local title company called our house. She was polite and asked if we were still confirmed for our appointment on the 14th of March. I think you have the wrong number, I told her. We haven't scheduled any appointments. Is this the Harrington residence at 1847 Creekside Drive? She asked. Yes, I said, my stomach tightening slightly. Let me check our records and get back to you, she said. She never called back. When I told Marge about it during dinner, she set her fork down. Her brown eyes went slightly flat. That's odd, Walter. We are the only Harringtons on Creekside. Probably just a clerical error, I said. I didn't follow up. By April, our mail thinned. The flyers arrived, but bank statements, investment summaries, and insurance notices disappeared. Did we get the bank statement? Marge asked one morning, sorting through the mail. Probably running late, I said. Marge made a soft sound in her throat that meant she wasn't convinced. I was completely blind to what was coming. The afternoon in mid-April, when the first real crack appeared, is something I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times. I had driven to 412 Del Mar Street to drop off a duplicate set of garage keys Roger had asked for. I parked in the driveway and walked toward the back door, where they usually kept the screen latched but the main door open. As I approached the back porch, I heard Clara's voice coming through the open kitchen window. She was on the phone. Her back was to the screen, and she hadn't heard my footsteps on the grass. Her voice wasn't the bright, warm tone she used when she brought flowers to Marge. It was low, hard, and carrying a sharp edge of panic. Roger, I just need 6 months, she was saying, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. That's all. I have the files, but we can't push the bank transfer too fast. If your dad checks the accounts before the trust paperwork is pending, the whole thing falls apart. Nobody is losing their home on my watch, do you hear me? But you have to stop spending. You have to keep the hotel's creditors quiet. There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the line. Then she spoke again, even sharper. I know exactly what I'm doing. Just trust me and give me the 6 months. Sharon has already agreed to help with the stamp. I stood frozen on the path, keys cold in my hand. In that moment, my safety compliance training didn't kick in. My fatherly instincts did. I didn't think about fraud. I assumed they were simply hiding a massive business debt from us out of pride, trying to manage a bank loan without worrying Marge and me. My heart ached for them. I took a step forward and knocked loudly on the wooden frame of the screen door. Clara spun around, her phone still in her hand. For a split second, her eyes went wide with pure terror. The look of a person who had just been caught in a lie. But before I could even process it, the terror vanished, replaced by her bright, familiar smile. Walter, she said, opening the screen door. I didn't hear you come up. Just dropping off the spare keys for the garage, I said, holding them out. Sorry to interrupt. You look exhausted, Clara. Is everything all right? Oh, just work stuff, she said, taking the keys and giving me a quick hug. You know how the law firm gets during tax season. Roger and I are just trying to get through the spring. She smelled of expensive lavender lotion. I patted her shoulder, told her to tell Roger to call me if they needed anything, and walked back to my truck. I drove home feeling sympathy. I had no idea that the 6 months Clara was begging for was the timeline my son set to seize my properties. I had no idea that Sharon was Clara's mother, Brenda, and the stamp was a forged notary seal. 2 days later, the security camera above our side gate went dark. It was out for about 20 minutes. When I noticed it later that evening on the monitor in the garage, I assumed it was a simple power flicker. I had spent 31 years trusting systems to work the way they were designed. The problem with that mindset is that you forget to account for the people who study systems, specifically to know which parts to break. June arrived with cool, misty Salem mornings. I had been meaning to add Marge's name to a certificate of deposit we kept at Columbia Pacific Bank for over a year, and I finally decided to stop putting it off. It was a Tuesday. I put on my good jacket, the one Marge likes because she says it makes me look like a man who hasn't completely surrendered to retirement, and drove down to the Lancaster Avenue branch. Carol Brennan had managed that branch for 14 years. She was a precise, professional woman who knew Marge and me by name. When I walked in, she greeted me warmly and showed me to her desk. But when she pulled up my accounts and her eyes scanned the screen, her expression shifted. It was a brief, subtle tightening of her mouth, but to a man who spent 31 years looking for leaks in high-pressure lines, it was as loud as a siren. "Walter," Carol said, her voice dropping as she turned her monitor toward me, "before we add Marge to the CD, I need to ask you about a document that was filed in our system last week. Are you aware of this?" I leaned in, adjusting my glasses. On the screen was a scanned copy of a durable financial power of attorney. The document granted Clara Wexler Harrington full authority to make financial decisions, access savings accounts, and manage property on my behalf. The signature at the bottom read Walter James Harrington in clean black ink. My throat went dry. "I never signed that," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands had gone cold. "I didn't think so," Carol said quietly. "The signature passed our automated system because it's very close. But when I compared it to your signature card from 2014, the curve on the capital W was wrong. You always loop the middle stroke to the right. This one loops to the left." And there was another flag. She scrolled down to show the notary block. The stamp read Sharon Meeks, Notary Public, State of Oregon. "Clara came in last Thursday," Carol explained. "She wanted to check the balances on your retirement accounts. We turned her away because she wasn't listed on the accounts. 2 days later, this POA was uploaded to our central records. When I saw the notary name, Sharon Meeks, I did a quick search. There is no notary registered in Oregon under that name. But I do know that Clara's mother's maiden name was Sharon Meeks before she married and became Sharon Keene. Clara's mother is a licensed notary under her current name, but she used her maiden name stamp here." The room felt suddenly very small. The air had the cold, metallic taste of a basement. My son and my daughter-in-law had forged my signature. They had used Clara's mother to stamp a fraudulent document, and they had done it to gain access to my life savings. "I need a physical copy of that document, Carol," I said. She printed it without a word along with the digital filing logs. The date of the upload was March 14th, Marge's 62nd birthday, the evening we had spent at her favorite seafood restaurant on the Willamette River. Roger and Clara had insisted we go out, even offering to pay for the meal. They had known exactly where we would be and for how long. They had built their entire timeline around the one night they knew our house would be empty. I sat behind the wheel of my truck in the bank parking lot, the printed pages of the forged power of attorney lying on the passenger seat. My hands were pressed flat against my thighs, holding them still. I've never been a man who panicked. In my years at the Water Authority, when a valve failed or a pressure line ruptured, panic was the fastest way to get someone killed. You don't react, you analyze. You trace the flow, isolate the leak, and shut down the system. So, I didn't drive home. I didn't call Roger to scream at him, and I didn't call Marge to scare her. Instead, I put the truck in gear and drove straight to the Marion County Recorder's office on Court Street. If they had filed a forged power of attorney at the bank, they had almost certainly filed something with the county to target my properties. The recorder's office smells of old paper, floor wax, and the dry institutional quiet that makes every footstep sound too loud. I walked up to the counter and spoke to Linda, a clerk I recognized from when I pulled permits for my workshop years ago. I handed her my driver's license. "Linda," I said, keeping my voice as flat and even as a compliance report, "I need to check if there have been any documents filed under my name or my property addresses in the last 18 months. She typed for a moment, her eyes reflecting the pale blue light of her monitor. Then she paused, looking at the screen with a slight frown. "Yes, Mr. Harrington, we have 2 filings. The first is a power of attorney from March 15th, and the second is a deed transfer request for 412 Delmare Street. She looked up. The deed transfer is currently in our pending folder. It's waiting on some signature verifications. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out. I need copies of both, Linda, I said. Right now. I sat in the waiting area, holding the printed copies. The deed transfer was 4 pages long. It was written in precise legal jargon, the kind of document a seasoned paralegal like Clara could draft in her sleep. It requested the transfer of the Delmare Street deed from my name to Rogers, with Clara signing as my attorney-in-fact under the forged authority. It was a perfect loop. They had forged my signature on the POA. Once the bank and the county accepted the POA as valid, Clara would have the legal authority to sign the deed over to Roger without me ever touching a pen. They were going to steal my house from right under my feet, and they were doing it while living in it rent-free. I walked out to my truck, sat down, and shut the door to block out the street noise. I pulled out my phone and called Dennis. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough. "Walter, what's going on?" "Dennis," I said, my voice finally cracking slightly. "I think Roger and Clara are trying to steal the Delmare house." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. In 24 years, I've never heard Dennis go completely silent like that. "Say that again, Walter." Slower. I told him everything. The bank visit, the loop in my signature, the Sharon Meeks notary stamp, the pending deed transfer at the recorder's office. I told him about March 14th, Marge's birthday, when they took us to dinner so they could file the paperwork while we were away. Dennis let out a long, slow breath. "Walter, it's criminal. That's fraud. That's real, prison-time fraud." "Does Marge know?" "Not yet," I said. "I'm still sitting in the parking lot. I wanted to make sure before I went home. Do you want me to come over?" "No," I said. "Let me talk to Marge first. But I need you to do me a favor. You still have that buddy at the sheriff's office?" "I do," Dennis said, "and I'm calling him the second we hang up." "Walter, I'm sorry. I really am. We'll fix it," I said. But as I started the engine, I didn't feel like a man who could fix anything. I felt like a father whose foundation had just washed away in a storm. When I got home, Marge was in the kitchen, washing some fresh lettuce from her garden. She looked up as I walked in, and before I could even take off my coat, her hands stopped moving. She saw my face, turned off the faucet, and dried her hands on a dish towel. "Walter," she said, her brown eyes going flat and serious. "What happened?" I led her to the kitchen table. I laid out the printed power of attorney and the pending deed transfer, and then I explained the loop on the W, the fake notary stamp, and what our son and daughter-in-law had been doing behind our backs. Marge didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap looking at the papers. Her face went pale, but her jaw was set. "They did this on my birthday?" she asked, her voice dropping to a low, quiet register. "Yes," I said. "They sat at our table, ate my cake, and then did this?" "Yes, Marge." She stood up, walked to our bedroom, and came back a moment later, holding the small metal safe we kept in the closet. She set it on the kitchen table and turned the dial with practiced, steady fingers. When the door opened, she reached in and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was her mother's diamond engagement ring, a 1.5-carat family heirloom that Marge had inherited 11 years ago. She opened the box. The ring was there, but when Marge held it up to the kitchen light, she froze. Her breath catches in her throat. She made a short, sharp sob that she tried to hold back but couldn't. Her hand began to tremble. I reached out and took the ring from her fingers. I didn't need to be a jeweler to see it. The stone caught the light with a harsh, uniform sparkle. It looked like glass. It had the cold, cheap look of cubic zirconia. The real diamond, the one her mother had worn for 41 years, was gone. "Clara was here last month," Marge whispered, the tears finally spilling over her eyelids. "She helped me organize the closet. She said she wanted to see the vintage lace on my old wedding dress. She was in here, Walter. She sat on our bed, hugged me, and she stole my mother's ring." I pulled Marge into my arms. Her body shook as she cried against my chest. She didn't cry loud, but it was that deep, wrenching sob that comes from a place of absolute betrayal. I held her tight, staring at the kitchen wall, and felt a cold, hard anger settle into my chest. Roger and Clara weren't just struggling with business debt. They were stripping our lives of everything we valued, one piece at a time. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Carol Brennan at the bank, asking her to freeze any activity on our savings accounts. The second was to Victoria Sinclair. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building on Court Street, a space that smelled of old leather books and good coffee. Victoria was 53 years old, broad-shouldered, with sharp gray eyes and the kind of stillness about her that you only see in people who spent decades in courtrooms, where the wrong word could cost a client everything. She listened to Marge and me without interrupting once, her hands flat on her mahogany desk. She read the copies of the power of attorney and the deed transfer twice. "The notary stamp is completely fraudulent," Victoria said, setting the papers down. "Under Oregon law, there is no Sharon Meeks registered as a notary public. But this is where the situation becomes significantly more serious, Walter." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Sharon Meeks is the maiden name of Clara's mother," Victoria explained. "Her legal name now is Brenda Keene. Your daughter-in-law used her mother's former name to order a fake notary stamp, and Brenda Keene signed the notary log using her maiden name to make it look like a third party verified the transaction. What Brenda did is notary impersonation under ORS 194-99 now. It's a criminal offense. We are looking at a clear conspiracy here that extends beyond Clara and Roger." My jaw tightened. Clara's mother had actively participated in this, a family affair. "Here is what we do," Victoria said, her voice cool and clinical. "First, I am filing an emergency revocation of this power of attorney with the Marion County Recorder's Office. That will freeze the pending deed transfer on Delmare Street immediately. Second, I will subpoena the server records from Clara's law firm. Since she used her work email to handle the title company, we will find the digital trail. Third, we prepare a civil complaint for fraud and elder financial abuse under ORS 12411. Under Oregon law, elder financial abuse allows us to sue for triple damages plus attorney fees." She looked at Marge, then at me. "But I need you to do something very difficult, Walter. I need you to be completely boring for the next 6 weeks." "Boring?" I asked. "Yes. Do not change your locks. Do not confront Roger. Do not change your daily routine. If they suspect you know, they will delete files, close accounts, and cover their tracks. Let them think the plan is moving forward smoothly. Can you do that?" I thought of my 31 years at the Water Authority, where I had to keep systems running under immense pressure without showing a single leak on the surface. "I spent 3 decades doing exactly that," I said. "I can do boring." Victoria nodded, a small tough smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Good. Let me do my job and you do yours." We walked out of her office into the bright June sunlight. Just as I unlocked the truck, my phone rang. The number was local, but not in my contacts. "Walter?" a woman's voice asked, sounding tentative. "It's Dorothy." Dorothy Aldridge from next door. Dorothy was 71, a quiet widow who had lived at 1847 Creekside for 12 years. We had always been friendly, exchanging greetings over the fence, but we had never called each other. "Dorothy," I said, "is everything okay at the house?" "Yes, but—" "Walter, I need you to come over. I have something on a USB drive that you need to see. I've been watching your mailbox." My stomach did a familiar unpleasant flip. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said. When we arrived, Dorothy met us at her front door. She looked nervous, holding a small black flash drive in her hand. Her nephew had installed a high-definition security camera system on her porch after a neighborhood break-in 2 years ago. The camera sat near the corner of her garage, giving it a clear, unobstructed view of our shared driveway and our mailbox. "I've seen Roger at your mailbox," Dorothy said, his voice tight with the discomfort of delivering bad news to a neighbor's child. "Multiple times over the last few months. At first I thought you had asked him to collect your mail while you were out. But then, last week, I saw a segment on the news about mail theft and deed fraud. It made me uneasy. So I went back through my camera logs. The system stores 90 days of footage. I saved everything I found." I thanked her, took the drive, and Marge and I went home. I plugged the USB into my laptop at the kitchen table. The footage was crystal clear. It showed Roger's blue sedan parking down the street. It showed him walking up our driveway in his gray weekend jacket. He had a key to our side gate. He went to the side of the house, reached up to the security camera I had installed above the gate and disconnected the cable. Then he went to our mailbox, opened it, and sorted through the envelopes. He took several white envelopes, slid them into his inner jacket pocket, replaced them with junk mail and grocery flyers he'd brought with him, reconnected the camera cable, and walked back to his car. It was my son. My own son, Roger. He was using his key to disable our security, stealing our bank statements and insurance documents, and hiding the evidence of their fraud. I stared at the screen. The image paused on Roger's face as he reached for the camera. My throat felt like it was filled with hot sand. My chest was so tight I could barely draw air. Marge sat down beside me, her hand resting on his shoulder. Her touch was the only thing that kept me from throwing the laptop through the kitchen window. "He did this," she whispered, her voice shaking but her eyes dry. "Our son." "He did," I said, my voice barely a growl. "What is in those white envelopes, Walter?" "The notices from the title company," I said. "The alerts from Columbia Pacific Bank about the power of attorney. The insurance warnings. He was intercepting them so we wouldn't see the leaks in the system." Marge pressed her lips together, her eyes flat and cold. "He thinks we are old." Walter, his eyes clean. "He thinks we are stupid. He thinks he can just sweep us away." "He's wrong," I said. "We have 6 weeks. We play the part. We let Victoria build the trap. Playing boring is much harder than it sounds. When you spend your life fixing things the moment they break, sitting on your hands, while your own son smiles at your dinner table and asks how your garden is doing, is a special kind of torture." The Sunday after our meeting with Victoria, Roger and Clara came over for dinner. Marge had made her famous chicken pot pie, the one that usually fills the kitchen with a warm, buttery smell that makes you feel like everything is right in the world. As we sat at the kitchen table, I watched Roger. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot at the corners, but he kept up a steady stream of talk about the Copper Harbor Inn, claiming they were fully booked for the upcoming weekend and might need to hire extra housekeeping staff. Clara sat beside him, quiet, her hands resting in her lap. I noticed she wasn't wearing her usual bright, confident expression. Her face was pale, and every time Roger spoke about the hotel's success, she looked down at her plate, her fingers twitching slightly against her napkin. It was the look of a passenger in a car that was heading toward a wall at 90 miles an hour. "The garden is coming along, Dad," Roger said, pointing out the window. "You still keeping up with the roses?" "Just trying to keep the weeds down," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Good, good," he said. "Marge, this pie is fantastic. We should feature something like this for the hotel breakfast. Clara, don't you think?" Clara jumped slightly at the sound of her name. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's very good, Marge." Marge smiled her secretary smile, the one she used for difficult parents when she was about to tell them their child had been suspended. "I'm glad you like it, Roger." I looked at Clara. She was staring at Marge's hands. Then her eyes flicked to the bedroom hallway, where our fireproof safe was kept in the closet. She looked like she wanted to say something, but she remained silent. I kept my palms flat on the table, feeling the steady pressure of the wood, reminding myself of Victoria's instructions. Boring. Keep it boring. 3 days later, Victoria called me back to her office. I went alone, while Marge stayed home to work on her flower beds. When I walked in, Victoria was holding a printed report from a security log. "We traced the ring, Walter," she said. "It was sold on May 12th to a jewelry resale shop on Lancaster Avenue called Burnside & Sons. The seller used a fake name and wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, but the shop's parking lot camera captured the vehicle plate. It was Roger's blue sedan. The shop owner told my investigator that the young man who sold it was sweating, constantly looking over his shoulder, and accepted a price far below the ring's actual value." My stomach clenched. It was Roger, not Clara, but my own son, who had physically walked into a shop and sold his mother's inheritance. "How much did he get for it?" I asked. $4,200, Victoria said, and I tracked the funds. They were deposited directly into the utility account for the Copper Harbor Inn. They used Marge's mother's diamond to pay the outstanding electric and water bills for a building that is technically closed. I leaned forward. "What do you mean, closed?" Victoria slid a second file across the desk. It was from the Oregon Department of Revenue and the Salem Fire Marshal. The Copper Harbor Inn hasn't been operating since February, Walter. They were cited for 3 major fire safety violations that were never resolved, and they owe over 14 months in unpaid business taxes. The state suspended their business license. The building is officially shut down. I stared at the documents. The seal of the state was stamped in red ink at the top of the suspension notice. But Roger just said they were fully booked, I said. He was talking about the weekend guests. It's a show, Victoria said. Every morning, Roger puts on a suit, drives to the building, unlocks the front door, and turns on the lobby lights. He sits in the office for 4 hours, then locks up and leaves. He's doing it to maintain the appearance of a functioning business so you won't suspect anything. My head felt heavy, like it was filled with water. I thought of my son dressing up in his blazer every morning to go sit in an empty, shuttered building, turning on the lights just to keep a lie alive. What about the social media? I asked. Those are backdated photos from their opening night 6 years ago, Victoria said. Clara's firm has digital backups that I subpoenaed. She's been posting cropped, filtered images from 2020 and writing the positive reviews herself under dummy accounts. She's trying to keep the creditors from calling you, but Roger is the one driving the debt. She paused, looking at me with a rare expression of sympathy. Walter, your son is in deep. We found bank records showing he owes over $80,000 to sports betting websites. He's been using the hotel's accounts to pay the interest, but they've run completely dry. That's why he targeted your properties. He needs a massive injection of capital to keep the bookies from filing civil judgments or going to the police. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. Salem was a quiet city, a place where people worked hard and minded their own business. I recalled when Roger was 12, how we would spend Saturday afternoons in the garage building a wooden soapbox car. He would hold the flashlight, his face dirty with sawdust, looking at me like I knew how to fix everything in the world. I had spent my life believing that if you followed the rules and checked the valves, the system would protect you. But my own son had bypassed every valve in our lives. Is there more? I asked. There is, Victoria said. I'm waiting on the final records from Clara's firm, Reyes and Harmon. I have a feeling Clara is starting to realize what Roger is doing. I saw an email chain between her and her mother, Brenda, where Clara was complaining about Roger's betting. She wrote that Roger was forcing her to use her notary log access. She's a paralegal, Walter. If she's caught in a fraud like this, she loses her license and goes to prison. She's terrified. I turned back to face her. If she's terrified, maybe she's the weak link. She might be, Victoria agreed. But don't push her. Let the pressure build. When a pipe is blocked, the pressure has to go somewhere. Just keep playing boring. It happened on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of our 6-week agreement. The afternoon was warm, the kind of dry Salem heat that makes the grass go yellow if you don't keep the sprinklers running. Marge had gone to the grocery store on Commercial Street, and I was in the front yard cleaning the filters on the irrigation valves. My hands were covered in black grease, which was exactly what I needed to keep my mind off the folders sitting on my laptop. I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked up, expecting Marge, but instead saw a gray sedan I didn't recognize. The door opened and Clara stepped out. She was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup, and the dark circles under her eyes made her look 10 years older than 33. She stood by the car door for a moment, clutching a thick manila envelope to her chest like it was a shield. She looked at me, her lower lip trembling. "Walter," she said, her voice dry and cracked, "is Marge here?" "No, Clara," I said, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "She's at the store. She'll be back in an hour." She let out a long, ragged breath and her shoulders collapsed. "Good. I need to talk to you. Just you." I led her to the front porch chairs, the ones Marge and I sat in on warm evenings. Clara sat down, but she didn't lean back. She sat on the edge of the seat, her fingers digging into the paper envelope. "Walter, I'm so sorry," she whispered, and then the tears started. They didn't run down her face slowly. They came in a rush, her heaving chest showing her struggle to stifle a sob. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to do it. I swear to you, I didn't want to do it." I sat quietly, my compliance safety training reminding me to let the pressure release. "Do what, Clara?" The trust. The properties. Rogers. He's out of his mind, Walter. He's completely lost. She wiped face with the back of her hand, her eyes red and wild. He owes $84,000 to people. Terrible people. They've been calling the house. They've been standing outside the hotel. They told him if he didn't pay the interest by July, they would go to the police about the unpaid business taxes. Or worse. She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of printed pages. She laid them on the table between us. He forged your name, she said, her voice shaking. He made me print the Oregon Durable Power of Attorney forms from my firm's server. He knew I had access to the templates. I told him it was illegal, that we could go to prison, but he screamed at me. He said if we didn't do it, we'd lose the hotel, the Del Mar house, and his life would be over anyway. He forced my mother, Brenda, to stamp it using her old maiden name, Sharon Meeks. He told Brenda that you had agreed to it verbally but were too sick to sign. My hand went to the papers. Brenda believed him? She wanted to believe him, Clara sobbed. She was worried about us. But Roger is the one who took the diamond. I didn't know he was going to steal Marge's mother's ring until after it was done. He came home with the cash, and when I asked where he got it, he laughed and said Marge wouldn't miss a piece of glass. I was disgusted, Walter. I've been sick to my stomach for weeks. She reached back into the envelope and pulled out a document marked Guarantor Agreement. This is what made me come today, she said, sliding it toward me. He used the fake power of attorney last month to take out a $50,000 loan on a 2019 pickup truck. He used the Del Mar house as collateral, and he listed you as the guarantor. I looked at the document. My forged signature was at the bottom, Walter James Harrington, written in that loop-left style. But that's not all, Clara whispered, her eyes filling with terror. Look at the next page. I turned the page. It was a life insurance policy application from Columbia Heritage Insurance. The policy was for $500,000, taken out on my life. The premium payments were scheduled to be drawn from the Copper Harbor Inn's business account, which was already overdrawn. The beneficiary listed was Roger Harrington. He told me it was just estate planning, Clara said, her voice dropping. But I saw the email he sent to his college friend Philip Briggs. He wrote that if the stress of the hotel collapse caused you to have a stroke, the insurance policy would cover all his debts. Walter, he was planning for you to die. The Salem afternoon went completely silent. The sound of the wind in the oak trees disappeared. The heat felt heavy and thick like wet cement. My son, my only child, the boy I had carried on my shoulders through the Salem fairgrounds, the boy I had taught to drive, had taken out a policy on my life, waiting for the pressure to break my heart. Where is Roger now? I asked. My voice was very quiet, very steady. He's at the hotel office, Clara said. He's sitting in the dark, pretending to work. He thinks the county recorder is going to approve the deed transfer on Saturday. He doesn't know you revoked the POA. She grabbed my wrist, her fingers cold and tight. Please, Walter, I'm a paralegal. If the state bar finds out, I lose my career. I'll go to prison. I'll testify. I'll tell the police everything Roger did. I have all the emails, the betting logs, the loan papers. I have it all right here. Just please, don't let Marge hate me. I looked at Clara. The daughter-in-law I had thought was the mastermind was just another victim of my son's decay. The leak in the system wasn't Clara, it was Roger. Clara, I said, gently pulling my hand back, I don't hate you, and Marge won't hate you for telling the truth. But you need to go to Victoria Sinclair's office. Right now. I'm calling her. She nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. I'll go. I'll tell her everything. I just want it to be over. She stood up, leaving the manila envelope on the table. I watched her get back into her car and drive away, her tires kicking up a small cloud of dust. I sat on the porch for a long time, the shadow of the oak tree moving slowly across the grass, holding the papers that proved my son was waiting for me to die. Marge returned from the grocery store about 40 minutes after Clara left. I heard her car door shut, and then the sound of her footsteps on the gravel driveway, slow and steady. She was carrying 2 bags of groceries, her arms straining slightly against the weight. I stood up from the porch chair. Leaving the manila envelope on the small table between the chairs, I walked down the steps, took the bags from her hands, and carried them into the kitchen. Marge followed me inside, set her purse on the counter, and took a long look at my face. She didn't ask what was wrong. She had known me for 38 years. She knew the difference between my safety compliance face, the one that was just dealing with a minor pressure leak, and my hollow face. "Who is here?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Clara," I said. Marge went still. She slowly took off her light jacket and hung it on the hook by the door. "What did she want, Walter?" "Come outside," I said. "There's some paperwork you need to see." We sat on the porch, the afternoon sun casting long, pale shadows across the grass. I handed Marge the documents Clara had left. I watched her face as she read them, noting the way her eyes scanned the lines of print, seeking some explanation that wasn't there. Marge is a woman who has spent her life managing crises in a school office. She's seen parents at their worst, children at their most desperate, and teachers in total panic. She has a high threshold for chaos. But as her eyes moved over the guarantor agreement for the $50,000 truck loan, her mouth tightened. And when she turned the page and saw the $500,000 life insurance policy, with Roger listed as the sole beneficiary, her brown eyes went completely flat. It was the look she got when there was no room left for compromise, the look of a secretary who had just discovered a student had been stealing from the office fund. "Our son," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It was cold, carrying the weight of a stone. "He bought a policy on your life." "Yes," I said. "And he used our house as collateral for a truck loan." "Yes, Marge. Where is Clara?" "She's on her way to Victoria Sinclair's office," I said. "She's terrified. Roger forced her mother, Brenda, to stamp the forged power of attorney. Clara wants to cooperate with the police to save her license." Marge looked at the envelope in her lap. She reached out and touched the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. "She took my mother's ring because he told her we wouldn't miss it. That is what hurts the most, Walter." She sat in our bedroom looking at my mother's wedding dress, and she had that ring in her pocket the entire time. "Roger took it," I said. "Clara claims she didn't know until after he brought the cash home." Marge let out a short, dry sound that was close to a laugh but had no warmth in it. "She still lived in our house. She still ate our dinners. She knew, Walter. She just didn't want to look at it because the truth was too expensive." She stood up, walked to the porch railing, and stared out at the garden. Her back was straight, her shoulders square. "Call Victoria," she said. "Tell her we have the files. Tell her to do whatever she needs to do to shut this down." I went into the house, sat at the kitchen table, and called Victoria Sinclair. She picked up immediately. "Walter," she said, "Clara is in my office right now. She's brought 2 flash drives with emails, bank records, and the digital notary log files. She's currently signing a sworn affidavit detailing Roger's sports betting debts and how he forged your name on the loan and the power of attorney." "The notary records are damning. Is it enough?" I asked. "It's more than enough," Victoria said. "We have a clear case of forgery in the first degree under ORS 16513, identity theft under ORS 1651800, and elder financial abuse under ORS 124.110. The life insurance policy alone is enough to show criminal intent. I'm contacting the Marion County Sheriff's Office. My buddy at the department, Detective Solis, is assigned to white-collar fraud cases. We are setting up a meeting for Monday morning to present the evidence and file the formal criminal complaint." She paused. "But Roger doesn't know Clara came to see you. We need to keep it that way. If he suspects she's turned on him, he might try to withdraw the remaining funds from the hotel accounts and run. I need you to play boring for just 4 more days." "I can do that," I said. "But Marge is done playing boring. Tell Margaret to stay home," Victoria said. "Don't let her see him. I'll handle the legal filings." The next day was Thursday. It was a hot, heavy day. I was in the garage, cleaning the grease from my hands when the landline rang. I walked inside and picked it up. "Hey, Dad." Roger's voice came through the line, casual and easy, the same voice he used when he was 10 and asking for lunch money. My hand tightened on the receiver. I had to force my breathing to go slow. "Roger," I said, "just wanted to check in. Clara and I were thinking of dropping by on Saturday evening. Her parents, George and Brenda, are in town. We thought we'd bring some steaks and have a barbecue in the backyard on Delmare Street. What do you think?" I looked out the kitchen window. The grass on the side yard was dry, the leaves of the oak tree dusty. "Saturday," I said. "Yeah. Just a quiet family dinner. Clara's mom wants to see Marge's garden. She hasn't been over since the spring. I thought of Brenda Keene. I thought of the Sharon Meeks notary stamp she had used to help my son steal my house. We'll be there, Roger, I said, keeping my voice flat. 7 o'clock, great, he said warmly, turning around with a plate of steaks. Let's eat. I hung up the phone. I walked into the living room and told Marge about the invitation. She was sitting in her favorite chair, her knitting needles silent in her lap. When I finished, she looked up, her brown eyes completely calm. We're going, Walter, she said. I want to look Brenda in the eye when she asks about my garden. I stood in the quiet kitchen later, the dial tone still ringing in my head like the hum of a pipe under high pressure. The leak was isolated, the system was shut down. But the pressure was still building, and on Saturday night, the line was going to burst. It began to rain on Saturday afternoon, the kind of thin, steady sheet Salem gets in late July. It doesn't announce itself with thunder, but just arrives and stays, soaking through everything. Marge and I drove to 412 Delmare Street in silence. The truck's wipers beat a slow, rhythmic path across the windshield. Marge sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap, looking out at the gray houses slipping past. We arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. The blue sedan was parked in the driveway, next to a clean, expensive SUV that I assumed belonged to Clara's parents, George and Brenda. Lights were burning in the kitchen and dining room windows, throwing a warm, gold glow onto the wet gravel. As we walked up the porch steps, Roger opened the door before we could knock. He was wearing a dark blue sweater and a bright smile. "Dad, Marge, come on in out of the rain," he said warmly, stepping back to let us pass. We had to move the grill to the back porch because of the weather, but the steaks are looking good. Marge stepped inside, shaking the water from her umbrella. "Hello, Roger," she said. Her voice was perfectly normal, but I noticed her eyes didn't linger on him. She looked past his shoulder, scanning the hallway. In the dining room, Clara was setting the table. When she saw us, she froze. A brief, sharp look of panic flickered in her eyes, but she forced a quick smile and came over to hug Marge. Clara's arms were stiff, and she didn't meet my eyes. She had spent the last 3 days at Victoria's office signing affidavits, and the strain was showing. She looked like she was standing on a trapdoor. Clara's parents were sitting on the sofa. George Wexler was a retired accountant who always wore a button-down shirt. Brenda Keene, Clara's mother, was a short, round woman with silver hair and a pleasant smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Marge, Walter, it's so good to see you," Brenda said, standing up to greet us. "Clara was telling me how beautiful your garden is looking this year. I've been wanting to drop by and get some tips on your hydrangeas." Marge shook Brenda's hand. Her brown eyes went completely flat, the look of a school secretary about to hand over a suspension slip. "The hydrangeas are doing fine, Brenda," Marge said, her voice quiet and clear, "but you have to be very careful with the soil. If you use the wrong ingredients, the plants will look healthy on the surface for a few weeks, and then they'll die from the roots up. You wouldn't think a little drop of poison would do it, but it does." Brenda blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Oh, well, yes, I suppose that's true. We're just happy to have the family together," George said, stepping in to break the sudden quiet. Roger was just telling us about his expansion plans for the hotel. We sat down at the table. Roger poured the wine. He was in high spirits, his voice loud as he described the Copper Harbor Inn's recent bookings. "We've had 3 travel bloggers contact us this week," Roger said, leaning forward. "Clara's been handling the PR. We're thinking of adding a small spa next spring. Salem is growing, and there's a market for boutique wellness." I looked at my son. I thought of the empty, shuttered building on Lancaster Avenue. I thought of him driving there every morning, turning on the lobby lights, and sitting in the dark for 4 hours just to maintain this lie. It was a masterpiece of compliance failure. The pressure in his life had reached a critical point, and he was still trying to convince me the seals were tight. "That sounds expensive, Roger," I said, taking a sip of water. "It's an investment, Dad," he said, dismissing my comment with a wave. "In business, you have to spend money to make money. Clara's firm has some great contacts for commercial financing. We're in a really good place." I looked at Clara. She was staring at her wine glass, her knuckles white. She looked like she wanted to disappear through the floorboards. "Is that so, Clara?" Marge asked, her voice dropping to that low, quiet register she used when she was listening closely. Clara jumped slightly. "Yes, we're looking at some options." Brenda smiled, reaching over to pat Clara's hand. "Clara is so organized, she gets that from me. I always tell her, if you have the right paperwork, you can handle anything." The silence that followed was heavy. I looked down at my plate, feeling the concrete curing in my chest. "Paperwork is important, Brenda," I said. "If the signatures aren't clean, nothing works." Brenda's smile didn't falter this time, but her eyes narrowed slightly. She was a woman who had signed a fraudulent notary log under her maiden name, and she was smart enough to feel the shift in the room's temperature. Roger stood up, picking up the empty wine bottle. "I'll grab another bottle from the kitchen. Dad, you want to help me check on the steaks?" "I'll help you, Roger," I said. I followed him into the kitchen. The screen door to the back porch was open, and the smell of grilling meat was mixed with the cool, wet smell of the rain. Roger set the bottle on the counter and reached for the spatula. "Dad," he said, his back to me. "I wanted to ask you something. I know you've been busy, but Claire and I are finalizing the trust paperwork next week. The notary is coming to the hotel office on Tuesday morning. We just need you to drop by for 10 minutes and sign the deed transfer for this Delmare property. Clara has all the papers ready, and it'll make the hotel's loan refinancing much cleaner." I stood near the door, my hands at my sides. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the metal roof of the porch. "Tuesday," I said. "Just a quick signature. It'll save us a lot of headache." I looked at his shoulders, tense under his sweater. "I'll think about it, Roger," I said. "Great," he said warmly, turning around with a plate of steaks. "Let's eat." We walked back into the dining room. Marge sat perfectly still, her flat eyes fixed on Brenda Keene. Clara sat beside her mother, her face completely pale. The dinner was served, and the table went quiet as the rain beat against the window pane. The steaks were quiet. We chewed and swallowed in the way that people do when they are trying to occupy their mouths so they don't have to speak. Roger tried to keep the conversation going, launching into a long story about a plumbing leak they had fixed at the hotel last month, but his voice sounded thin against the steady drum of the Salem rain outside. George Wexler nodded politely, his accountant mind probably trying to calculate the cost of a commercial plumber. Brenda Keene kept her eyes on her plate, her fork moving with small mechanical gestures. She hadn't looked at Marge since the hydrangeas comment. Marge ate half her steak, laid her fork across her plate, and reached for her purse on the floor beside her chair. She opened the latch with a dry metallic click that sounded like a safety valve closing. She reached in and pulled out the small worn velvet ring box. She set it on the table, right between the salt shaker and Brenda's wine glass. "Brenda," Marge said. Her voice was quiet, the tone she used when she was announcing a school assembly. "I wanted to show you this. I know you love antique jewelry." Brenda looked up, her smile returning with a visible effort. "Oh yes, I do. What is it?" Marge opened the lid. The cubic zirconia stone caught the dining room light with a harsh, artificial glare. "This is my mother's engagement ring," Marge said. "She wore it for 41 years. It's a family heirloom. But a few weeks ago, I noticed something strange. The stone didn't look right. It caught the light differently." Roger set his wine glass down. It made a sharp glass-on-wood sound that was slightly too loud. "Mom, why are we talking about jewelry during dinner?" "I'm just showing Brenda," Marge said, her eyes never leaving Brenda's face. "Walter took it to a jeweler on Commercial Street. He checked it under the microscope. He said the real diamond is gone, Roger. Someone took it out of the setting and replaced it with a piece of cheap glass." The dining room went completely silent. The only sound was George Wexler's fork scraping against his plate, a sound he stopped immediately when he realized nobody else was moving. That's terrible," Brenda said. Her voice was slightly higher than it had been. She looked at the ring, then at Clara, who was staring down at her lap, her breathing shallow. "Who would do such a thing?" "That's the interesting part," Marge said, leaning forward slightly. "The jeweler said this kind of replacement is common when people are desperate for cash. They think the owner won't notice. But the police are already tracing the resale shops in Salem." Victoria Sinclair has an investigator who specializes in this. They found a shop on Lancaster Avenue called Burns' Sons. Roger's fork stopped halfway to his plate. He didn't drop it, but his fingers went stiff around the metal handle. A tiny bead of sweat appeared at his temple, running down into his sideburn. Burnside and Sons, Roger said. He tried to make his voice sound casual, but it came out flat, stripped of the salesmanship he had been using all evening. I've never heard of it. I hadn't either, Marge said. But the investigator pulled the parking lot camera logs from May 12th. The seller wore sunglasses and a cap, but they parked a blue sedan in the lot. A blue sedan with the license plate matching yours, Roger. George Wexler set his fork down. He looked at Roger, then at Clara, his accountant's eyes suddenly sharp. Roger? What is Marge talking about? Nothing, Roger said, his voice rising, a sharp edge of anger cutting through the panic. This is ridiculous, Mom. You're accusing me of stealing your ring because of a car in a parking lot? Do you know how many blue sedans are in Salem? The license plate was a match, Roger, I said, keeping my voice even. Brenda Keene's face went white. She looked at Clara. Clara, what's going on here? Clara didn't answer. A single tear ran down her cheek, landing on her napkin. She didn't wipe it away. She looked like she had reached the end of her strength. Roger, George said, his voice low and dangerous. Is this true? No, Roger yelled. Standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Dad, what is this? You bring Mom over here to accuse me of theft? In my own house? I'm trying to build a business. I'm trying to save the hotel. We've been working ourselves to the bone, and you come in here with these crazy theories. I looked up at him. I looked at the dark blue sweater, the jawline he had inherited from me, the stubborn set of his shoulders. I felt no anger, only the cold, heavy weight of a safety compliance inspector who had just found the source of the leak. It's not a theory, Roger, I said. We have the files from Victoria Sinclair's office. We have the bank records of the forged power of attorney from March 14th. We have the notary log showing Brenda's signature under her maiden name, Sharon Meeks. George Wexler spun around to face his wife. Brenda? Sharon Meeks? Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Roger, her eyes wide with terror, then at Clara. Roger told me it was okay, Brenda whispered, her voice cracking. He said Walter had agreed to the deed transfer, but was having memory issues, that he was showing signs of early cognitive decline. He said the trust was the only way to save the properties from the bank. Clara, you told me he was handling it. Clara finally looked up, her eyes red, her face wet with tears. I didn't tell you that, Mom, she said, her voice shaking. I told you Roger was out of control. I told you he was forcing me to get the files. Roger, I went to Walter's office. I went to the porch. I gave him the envelope. I gave him the loan papers, the truck contract, the life insurance policy. I gave him everything. Roger stared at his wife, his face shifting from anger to absolute disbelief. The blue sweater seemed to deflate. You did what? He whispered. I couldn't do it anymore, Roger. Clara sobbed, covering her face with her hands. You were going to let his father die for the insurance. You're sick. You're completely sick. The rain drummed on the window, loud and steady, filling the silence that followed Clara's confession. The dining room table looked like a crime scene, though the only things on it were half-eaten steaks, spilled red wine staining the white tablecloth, and a cheap velvet ring box sitting open. The silence was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Clara's quiet heaving sobs. George Wexler stood up slowly. His ruddy face had gone pale, and he looked at his wife, Brenda. George was a retired accountant who lived his life by double-entry bookkeeping, where everything had to balance. This didn't balance. Brenda, George said, his voice flat and terrifyingly quiet. Tell me you didn't sign a notary log using your maiden name. Tell me you didn't help Roger forge Walter's signature. Brenda, answer me. Brenda Keene covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. George, Roger said Walter had agreed. He said Walter's memory was failing and that he couldn't handle the paperwork anymore. He said the bank was going to take the Del Mar house if we didn't put it in a trust. I was just trying to protect Clara's future. Roger swore to me that it was all legal, that it was just estate planning. You signed a fraudulent notary log, George roared, his voice shaking the dining room windows. That is a felony, Brenda. You've ruined us. You've ruined Clara. Do you have any idea what this means? We could lose our retirement, our home, everything we've built, because you listened to this criminal. Roger stood near the kitchen doorway, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He looked at Clara, then at me. The bravado, the talk of travel bloggers and spa expansions had vanished. He looked like a cornered animal looking for any hole in the fence. "Dad," Roger said, his voice cracking as he took a step toward me. "You have to understand, the hotel, the interest payments were killing us. The bookies, they were going to go to the police about the unpaid business taxes. Or worse. I just needed 6 months. I was going to pay you back every cent, I swear to you. You have the pension, you have the Creekside house, you don't even use this property. Why does it matter if my name is on the deed? You always held it over my head anyway. Clean paperwork, you said. You never trusted me to build anything on my own." I looked at my son. I thought of the 31 years I had spent at the Water Authority. I thought of the safety manuals I had written, the compliance regulations I had enforced, the pressure tests I had run. In all those years, I had never seen a valve fail because it was too weak. It always failed because someone pushed the pressure beyond what the system was designed to hold. Roger had pushed Marge and me until the line burst, and now he was asking why the water was dirty. "You stole Marge's mother's ring, Roger," I said. My voice came out quiet, almost clinical. "You forged my name on a $50,000 loan. You filed a document stating I was suffering from cognitive decline, and you took out a life insurance policy on me. It was just a contingency," Roger yelled, his eyes wild. "It was just paperwork to satisfy the lenders. I wasn't going to let anything happen to you." Marge stood up. She didn't raise her voice, but when she spoke, the room went completely silent. "You wanted your father to die, Roger," she said. Her brown eyes were completely flat. "You wrote that he was losing his mind. I spent 24 years at Hoover Elementary, watching children grow up, watching them make mistakes and learn from them. I thought I knew my own child. I remember when you were 7, you cried for 3 days because you lost your favorite toy. Now you sat at my table, ate my birthday cake, and you planned for your father's death so you could pay off your betting debts. You are not my son. I don't know who you are, but you are not my son." Roger took a step back, his face turning a dark, mottled red. He reached toward the kitchen counter, his fingers searching for his car keys. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice trembling. "This is crazy. We're leaving. Clara, get your purse. We're going." Clara didn't move. She kept her head down, her shoulders shaking. "Clara," Roger snapped, his voice sharp and demanding, "get in the car, now." Clara looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was a sudden hard resolve in her face that I hadn't seen before. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Roger," she said, her voice dropping. "I've already packed my bags. I'm staying at a hotel tonight, and I've already signed the affidavit for Victoria Sinclair. I filed for divorce this morning. I'm done." Roger froze. His hand stayed hovered over the counter, inches from his keys. You did what?" "It's over, Roger," Clara said. "I'm not going to prison for you. I'm not losing my license. I told Walter everything. I gave him the flash drives." Roger looked at her for a long, quiet second. The realization that his wife had turned on him, that his mother-in-law was implicated, and that his parents had the evidence of his fraud, seemed to hit him all at once. The anger vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow panic. He grabbed his keys from the counter. "You're all crazy," Roger whispered. He turned and ran toward the back door, slamming the screen door behind him. Marge sat back, down in her chair. She didn't watch him leave. She just reached out, picked up the velvet ring box, and closed the lid. "He's going to the hotel," Clara said, her voice small. "He thinks he can destroy the server records." "He can't," I said. "Victoria's investigator has already secured the copies. The sheriff's office is meeting with us on Monday." George Wexler sat down heavily, his head in his hands, his fingers clawing at his hair. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a deep professional shame. "Walter, Marge, I don't know what to say. Brenda will cooperate. I'll make sure she tells the sheriff everything. I won't let her hide behind any more lies. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what my family has brought to your door." Brenda Keene was crying quietly into her napkin, her shoulders slumped. The rain continued to beat against the kitchen window, a steady, cold Salem rain that seemed like it would never stop. The ride back to Creekside Drive was silent. The rain had settled into a steady, gray hum that Salem gets when a front stalls over the valley. Marge sat in the passenger seat of my truck, her hands folded over her purse, staring straight ahead through the sweep of the windshield wipers. When we got home, Marge didn't go to the kitchen to make tea. She didn't go out to the garage to see if I was organizing. She went straight to the bedroom, pulled her mother's velvet box from her purse, and placed it back inside the safe. She turned the dial, locking it away, and then she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I stood in the doorway watching her. "We did what we had to do, Marge," I said softly. Marge looked up at me. Her brown eyes were still, but the coldness had softened into something close to exhaustion. "I know, Walter, but that doesn't make the kitchen feel any warmer." "Our own son. He made his decisions," I said. "He was waiting for me to die to clear his debts." She pressed her lips together and nodded once, then let the sheriff do his job. On Monday morning, the Salem rain had cleared, leaving the streets wet under a pale July sun. Victoria Sinclair met us in the lobby of the Marion County Sheriff's Office on a street. Clara was already there, sitting on a bench clutching a folder. She had spent the weekend at a local hotel, and she looked like a woman who hadn't slept in 3 days. Her father, George, was sitting beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. Brenda Keene was not with them. George had left her at their hotel, with instructions to stay put until the sheriff called. Victoria Sinclair led us into a small windowless conference room that smelled of industrial carpet and stale coffee. A few minutes later, Detective Solis walked in. He was a tall man of 45, with a receding hairline and the calm, unhurried manner of a compliance auditor. He shook my hand, then Marge's, and nodded to Clara. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington," Solis said, sitting at the head of the table. "Victoria has shared the initial files with me, but I want to go through the physical copies you've brought, and then I want to take Clara's statement." Victoria slid the folder containing the forged power of attorney, the guarantor agreement, the pickup truck loan, and the life insurance policy across the table. "Let's start with the power of attorney," Solis said, opening the file. "We've already run the notary stamp. Sharon Meeks is indeed the maiden name of Brenda Keene. Under ORS 19499, using a maiden name to create a fraudulent notary stamp to notarize a deed transfer constitutes notary impersonation and criminal simulation. Because she did this to facilitate the transfer of real property, it escalates to a Class C felony." He looked at Clara. "Clara, did you witness your mother stamping this document?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice small but steady. "Roger brought the papers home on March 14th. He told my mother that Walter had verbally authorized the deed transfer because of his health, but that Walter didn't want to deal with the notary paperwork. My mother stamped it in our kitchen. I told him it was wrong, but Roger screamed at me. He said if we didn't do it, his creditors would destroy us anyway." Solis wrote a note in his pad. "And the signature on the guarantor agreement for the truck?" "Roger forged it," Clara said. "He spent 3 days practicing Walter's signature on scrap paper. I found the papers in his desk. I saved them. They're on the flash drive." Solis turned to me. "Mr. Harrington, did you ever authorize Roger to use your name as a guarantor for a $50,000 loan on a 2019 pickup truck?" "I did not," I said. "I didn't even know the truck existed until Clara brought the papers. The bank manager, Carol Brennan, flagged the POA when Clara tried to access my savings balance." "And the life insurance policy?" Solis asked, turning the page. "He used the fake power of attorney to sign my name on the application," I said. "He listed himself as the sole beneficiary. The premiums were paid from the hotel's operating account." Clara found the email he sent to Philip Briggs, stating he was waiting for the stress of the hotel collapse to cause me to have a stroke. Solis read the printed email. He didn't make a sound, but his eyebrows rose slightly. He set the page down and looked at me. "This is more than a financial scam, Mr. Harrington," Solis said. "This shows a pattern of criminal conspiracy. Identity theft under ORS 165-800 and forgery in the first degree under ORS 165-013. The life insurance policy, combined with the false statement about your cognitive decline on the loan application, shows a deliberate attempt to exploit your financial status and prepare for your death. Under Oregon's elder abuse statutes, SORS 124.111, this triggers civil liability, but criminally, we are looking at multiple Class B and Class C felonies. He stood up, closing his notepad. Clara, I need you to go with Detective Miller to record your formal statement. We will also need your mother, Brenda Keene, to come in. Since she has agreed to cooperate, her attorney can coordinate with the district attorney for a plea agreement, but she will be charged. Clara stood up, nodding. I understand. I just want to tell the truth. George stood up with her. We'll cooperate fully, Detective. Thank you. Marge and I sat in the room after they left. Victoria Sinclair sat across from us, folding her glasses and putting them in her case. The wheels are turning, Walter, she said. Solis will issue a warrant for Roger's arrest by this afternoon. He's already frozen the transfer files at the recorder's office. The Delmare property is safe. The bank has already flagged the POA as revoked. I looked at the conference room wall. I thought of the 31 years of maintenance reports, safety certifications, and compliance logs. Every time I had fixed a valve, I had done it because I wanted the system to work. I wanted to prevent the burst. But sometimes when a system is too decayed, you can't fix it with a new seal. You have to shut it down, dig up the old pipes, and start over from the foundation. Where do you think Roger is? Marge asked Victoria. He's likely at the hotel, Victoria said. Solis has deputies heading now. Roger's sports betting debts are already being traced. He has no money and no options. It's over. Marge stood up. She walked to the door, then turned and looked at me. Let's go home, Walter. I want to check on my garden. I stood up, took her hand, and we walked out of the station into the cool Salem morning. The pressure was gone, but the damage was done, and the long, slow work of rebuilding our lives was about to begin. By Monday afternoon, the pale July sun had been swallowed by dark, heavy clouds rolling in from the coast. The weather was turning back to rain. I was in the garage, standing by my workbench, when the side door opened and Dennis Vance walked in. He was wearing his heavy canvas work jacket, his gray face looking unusually serious. Walter, Dennis said, shutting the door behind him to block out the rising wind. I just heard from my buddy Solis at the department. They went to the Copper Harbor Inn about an hour ago with the warrant. I set down the wrench I was holding. And Roger wasn't there, Dennis said. His office was completely empty. The lights were on, the front door was unlocked, and his cell phone was sitting right on his desk, plugged into the wall charger. But his blue sedan is gone. He must have left in a massive hurry, leaving his phone behind so he couldn't track his GPS. Solis thinks he saw the deputies pulling up, or someone tipped him off. They've put out an all-points bulletin on the car, but so far, nothing. My stomach went cold. A system with a leak is manageable because you know where the fluid is going. A system that has ruptured completely, where the pressure is dropped to zero, and you don't know where the break is a far more dangerous problem. Roger was out there, somewhere in the county, with no money, no wife left, his business shuttered, and a felony warrant with his name on it. He had nothing left to lose. Marge came out to the garage a few minutes later, holding a pot of coffee. She set it on the workbench and looked at Dennis. They didn't find him? She asked. Not yet, Marge, Dennis said gently. But they will. The car is hard to miss. Every officer in the valley is looking for it. Marge sat on a wooden stool, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked like she was mourning. He doesn't have any money, Walter. How is he going to run? He has the truck loan money, I said. He took out $50,000 last month. He might have kept some of it in cash. At exactly 4 o'clock, the landline in the kitchen began to ring. The sound came through the open garage door, sharp and persistent. In a house that had been silent for 2 days, it sounded like a fire alarm. Marge went to stand up, but I put a hand on her shoulder. I'll get it, I said. I walked into the kitchen, picked up the receiver from the wall cradle, and pressed it to my ear. Walter Harrington, I said. For 3 seconds, there was only the sound of heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. The background noise was a low, mechanical hum, the sound of an engine idling. Dad, Roger's voice came through. It was rough, cracked, and vibrating with an intensity that made my grip on the receiver tighten. He wasn't using the casual, easy voice he had used at the dinner table. This was the voice of a man who had slipped under the surface. Roger, I said, keeping my voice flat and even, the voice of a safety compliance inspector dealing with a line under extreme pressure. Where are you? He let out a short, dry sound that was close to a sob but had no warmth in it. You ruined me, Dad. You and Clara. You went to the police. You went to Victoria. You locked me out of the Delmare house. You forged my signature, Roger, I said. You stole Marge's mother's ring. You took out a life insurance policy on my life. You brought this on yourself. I was going to pay it back, he screamed, his voice breaking through the speaker with a raw, desperate fury. I told you that 100 times. I just needed a little more time. The hotel was my dream, Dad. It was the only thing I had in my life, and you had to play the safety inspector. You had to check the gauges. You had to double-check the paperwork. You always had to be right, no matter what it cost me. The engine, in the background, revved slightly. Roger, I said, you need to turn yourself in. Solis has a warrant. Running is only going to make it worse. Turn myself in? He laughed, a wild, high-pitched sound. To go to prison? For what? Trying to save my business? Clara's mother is the one who stamped the papers. Clara's the one who gave you the files. They're the ones who should be in jail. They are cooperating, I said, and you need to do the same. No, Roger whispered, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, cold register that sent a chill straight down my spine. I'm not going to prison, Dad, but I'm not going down alone. You think you've shut down the system? You think you've isolated the leak? You haven't seen anything yet. You're going to pay for what you did to me. Both of you. Before I could answer, the line went dead. The dry, sterile hum of the dial tone filled the kitchen. I stood with the receiver in my hand, staring out the window at the gray Salem rain, starting to fall on Marge's garden. The wind was whipping the branches of the oak tree, scattering dry leaves across the grass. I walked back out to the garage. Dennis and Marge were both standing by the workbench, their eyes fixed on my face. It was him, Dennis said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said, setting the phone down. He's driving. He was in a car. He's unhinged, Dennis. He's blaming us for everything. Marge's face went very pale. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. What did he say, Walter? He said we haven't seen anything yet, I said. He said we're going to pay. Dennis reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I'm calling Solis right now. We need a patrol car parked outside this house. Roger is completely out of his mind. I looked at the garage door, the heavy wooden panel that separated us from the driveway. I had spent my life believing that if you designed a system with enough safety valves, you could control any pressure. But my son was a force that didn't care about safety valves. He was a rupture in the main line, and the water was rising fast. The patrol car arrived about 40 minutes after Roger hung up. It parked at the curb under the dripping branches of our street maple, its headlights casting long, white beams through the falling rain. The deputy inside sat with the engine running, a quiet sentinel against a threat that felt entirely surreal. Marge and I sat in the living room. We hadn't turned on the television. We hadn't opened our books. Dennis was sitting in the armchair near the window, his heavy shoulders hunched forward, his eyes scanning the dark street every few minutes. The rain hit the glass in sudden, wild bursts as the wind picked up. On the floor beside his boot lay an old ash baseball bat he'd brought from his garage. A silent acknowledgement that my retirement safety checklists were no longer sufficient. At 10 p.m., my cell phone rang. It was Detective Solis. Walter, Solis said. We ran the number Roger called you from. It was a burner card purchased at a convenience store on Commercial Street about 2 hours before the call. The tower ping shows he was moving north on Interstate 5 when he called. We've alerted the state police, but with the rain, visibility is poor. We've got highway cameras looking for the plates, but at this hour, with the storm, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. He's staying mobile. He threatened us, Solis, I said. He said we're going to pay, I know, Solis said. That's why I've got the patrol car at your house. We're keeping a unit there through the night. I don't want you leaving the property. If you hear anything, if you see any vehicle pull into the driveway, you call the dispatcher immediately. I will, I said. The night passed in a series of long, hollow hours. Marge eventually lay down on the sofa, a knitted blanket pulled to her chin, her eyes closed but her breathing shallow and uneven. She wasn't sleeping, she was just waiting. Dennis and I didn't speak. In the quiet house, every creak of the floorboards, every splash of rain against the glass, sounded like a footstep. I kept thinking of Roger when he was 16, how he had wrecked his first car, a beat-up station wagon I'd bought him. He had called me from a gas station, crying, terrified I would be angry. I hadn't been angry. I had just driven out, cleared the glass from the road, and carried him home. I had fixed the system then. But even back then, I remembered how he had blamed the wet road, the poor tires, the other driver. Anyone but himself. He had always been a boy who looked for an exit sign instead of a repair kit. At 6:30 Tuesday morning, the landline rang again. The sound was flat and jarring in the early light. I stood up, my knees stiff from the hours in the chair, and walked to the kitchen. "Walter," Detective Solis's voice came through, sounding tired. "We found the car." My heart gave a heavy, slow thud against my ribs, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "Where?" "An old gravel pit near the Willamette River, about 15 miles north of Kaiser," Solis said. A highway maintenance worker spotted the blue sedan parked behind some brush. The keys were still in the ignition. The battery was dead because the headlights had been left on. I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out at the gray morning. "Is he there?" "No," Solis said. "The car was empty, but we found some items on the passenger seat. There was a handwritten note, Walter. And his wallet." "A note?" I asked. "Yes." Solis paused for a second, and I could hear the rustle of paper on his end. "It's a suicide note. It says he couldn't face the prison time, that he had failed everyone, and that he was going to the river. He wrote that the current would wash away his debts. We have a search and rescue team heading to the Willamette now with a boat. The current is fast because of the rain, so if he went in, it might take days to recover anything." The silence in the kitchen went deep. I looked at the floorboards, my mind tracing the details of the report, the headlights left on, the keys left in the ignition, the wallet left behind. It was a perfect dramatic package. It was exactly the kind of scene you would design if you wanted everyone to stop looking for you. "Walter?" Solis asked. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I said. "I'm sorry, Walter. I know this is the worst possible outcome, Solis," I said, my voice dropping. "Don't call off the search on the roads. What do you mean?" "Roger is a manipulator," I said. "He spent 6 years writing fake reviews for a shuttered hotel. He spent 3 weeks practicing my signature to forge a loan. He doesn't jump into rivers. He builds diversions. The keys in the ignition, the dead battery, the wallet on the seat. It's too clean. He wants us to think he's dead, so we'll stop checking the gauges. It's a staged leak." Solis was silent for a long moment. "We have to treat the river threat as real, Mr. Harrington. We have to run the search, I know," I said. "But check the bus stations. Check the rental agencies. He had $50,000 in cash from that truck loan, and Clara said he kept it. He's not in the Willamette. He's running. We'll keep the APB active," Solis said. "And we'll keep the patrol unit at your house for now. Just stay inside." I hung up the phone. I walked back into the living room. Marge was sitting up on the sofa, the blanket fallen to her lap. She had heard my voice and she was looking at me with an expression of pure, naked dread. "They found the car," she whispered. "Yes," I said, sitting beside her. "Near the river, is he?" "He left a note, Marge," I said. "He wants us to think he went into the water." Marge closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. But then she opened them and I saw the flat, secretary look return to her brown eyes. "He's not in the river, is he, Walter?" "No," I said, taking her hand and squeezing it, feeling the dry warmth of her skin. "He's not in that river, Marge. He's too selfish to jump. He's still out there, somewhere, and he's still running from the pressure he built himself." On Wednesday morning, the search and rescue teams were still dragging the Willamette River. The rain had stopped, but the water was high and turbid, carrying tree branches and silt downstream. I stood on the back porch of Creekside Drive, holding a cup of black coffee, watching the clouds break over the Coast Range. Dennis was in my workshop, cleaning some tools on the old bench grinder. He was working slowly, his face looking tired and lined in the fluorescent light. Dennis had lived next door for 24 years. He had watched Roger grow from a toddler who threw tantrums in the grass to a man who stole from his own mother. He felt the weight of this, almost as much as we did, though he didn't say it. The presence of the patrol car at the curb was a constant, silent reminder that the threat was still active. Marge was in the kitchen, sorting through a pile of mail that had finally started arriving normally again. It was mostly bills, bank notifications, and retirement statements. Clean, dry paperwork that had once quieted the foundation of our lives. At 11:30 a.m., Victoria Sinclair called my cell. I went into the hallway to answer it, shutting the door behind me. "Walter," Victoria said, her voice carrying a sharp edge of professional satisfaction. "Detective Solis just called me. The river search is being scaled back." "Why?" I asked. "Because you were right," she said. Solis's team checked the Greyhound terminal in Portland. They found a security camera tape from Monday evening, about 2 hours before Roger called you from the burner phone. A man matching Roger's description, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap, bought a ticket to Seattle under the name Michael Briggs. He paid in cash. They ran the pings from the burner card again. The pings showed the card was active at a tower near the Portland bus terminal, at exactly the time the bus departed. My hand went to the doorframe. I felt a slow, heavy release of tension in my shoulders, but it was immediately replaced by a cold, hard anger. Michael Briggs. That was the name of his college friend. The one he had emailed about the life insurance policy. The one he had joked with about me having a stroke. He was using his friend's name to run. "So he's in Washington," I said. "Yes," Victoria said. "Solis has contacted the Seattle Police Department and the King County Sheriff. They've updated the APB and the warrant to the national database. Since he crossed state lines to evade prosecution, the FBI has been notified. It's a federal matter now. He's running on cash, but $50,000 doesn't last long when you're hiding from the law. He can't use his bank cards, and he can't contact anyone without us knowing." She paused, letting the weight of the news settle. "But there's more, Walter. The district attorney's office has officially filed charges against Brenda Keene. They've charged her with 1 count of notary impersonation under ORS 194.990 and 1 count of criminal conspiracy. She's pleading guilty. Her attorney negotiated a deal. She'll get 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. But her notary commission is revoked forever. Her career is finished. She was a woman who prided herself on her standing in her church and her neighborhood. Now she's a convicted felon. What about Clara?" I asked. "Rise and Harmon fired her yesterday morning," Victoria said quietly. "The state bar is conducting an investigation into her involvement with the forged templates. She won't face criminal charges because of her cooperation, but she will likely lose her paralegal certification. Clara's father, George, is devastated. He's taking out a second mortgage on their house in Salem to pay for Clara's legal fees and Brenda's fines. The hotel creditors are already filing lawsuits to seize whatever assets are left in the business accounts." I stood in the quiet hallway. I looked through the kitchen doorway at Marge, who was sitting at the table. She was looking at a bank statement, her thumb rubbing the corner of the paper in a slow, rhythmic circle. "Roger destroyed them," I said. "He destroyed his own family. He did," Victoria agreed. "He was a leak that turned into a flood. Walter, he took everyone down with him, but you and Marge, you're clear. The county recorder has officially rejected the deed transfer for Delmare Street. The house is legally yours. And the bank has removed the forged power of attorney from your accounts. Your retirement is secure." I thanked her and hung up. I walked into the kitchen and sat across from Marge. I laid my hands flat on the table, feeling the solid wood. "Roger is in Seattle," I said. Marge looked up. Her brown eyes were clear, but they looked very old. "He didn't jump, no," I said. "He bought a bus ticket under a fake name. He used the truck loan cash. He's running." She let out a long, slow breath. She didn't cry. She just nodded once, a quick, sharp gesture. "He always was a coward, Walter. When he was in high school, he broke the neighbor's basement window with a baseball. He came home and told me Dennis's dog had done it. He let the neighbor scream at Dennis for 2 days before I found the ball in his closet, hidden behind his old boots. He had that same look on his face back then. That smooth, easy smile that made you think he was the victim." "I remember," I said. "He never changed," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We just wanted to believe he did because he was ours." We sat in the quiet kitchen, the pale July sun finally warming the glass of the window. The system was isolated. The leak was stopped. My house on Delmare Street was mine. My retirement was secure, and my wife was beside me. But the cost of the repair was a son who was no longer our son, a family that had been torn to pieces, and a name that would always carry the stain of my own blood's betrayal. I had spent 31 years fixing high-pressure lines, but this was a rupture that could never be repaired. I looked out the window at the garden, where the roses were clean and red in the pale sun, but the ground was still wet and heavy. I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a man who had survived a collapse, standing in the mud of a broken dam, wondering if the water would ever run clear again. By the second week of August, the Salem heat had settled into a heavy, yellow haze that smelled of dry grass and asphalt. The Willamette River had dropped back to its normal lazy summer levels, leaving wide mudflats baked dry under the sun along the gravel pit where Roger's car had been found. The search and rescue boats had long since returned to their slips, and the water was quiet again. Margie and I spent our quiet mornings sitting on the creekside porch. The deputy's patrol car had been removed 2 weeks earlier. Once Solis confirmed that Roger's burner phone was completely inactive and pings in the Oregon area had ceased. The silence in our creekside house was completely different now. It was no longer the peaceful quiet of retirement. It was the heavy, watchful silence of parents waiting for a phone to ring. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the workshop, trying to fix a faulty switch on my drill press, the copper wires cold and stiff in my fingers, when Marge walked out, holding my cell phone. Her face was calm, but she held the phone with both hands, her knuckles white. "It's Victoria," she said. I took the phone, wiped my hands on my shop apron, and pressed it to my ear. "Walter here. Walter. They found him," Victoria said. Her voice was flat, carrying the professional gravity of an attorney who had seen this exact script play out dozens of times before. "The Seattle Police Department took him into custody about 3 hours ago." I slowly sat down on the edge of my workbench, the metal cold through my jeans. "Where was he?" "A motel on Pacific Highway South near SeaTac Airport," Victoria explained. "A place called the Crestwood Suites. It's the kind of motel that charges by the week and doesn't ask for a credit card if you have cash." He'd been using the name Michael Briggs, just like on the bus ticket. "How did they track him?" I asked. "He couldn't stop, Walter," Victoria said, a note of quiet disgust in her voice. "He had $50,000 in cash from the pickup truck loan. But instead of using it to buy a car or leave the area, he spent the last 10 days in that motel room, logging into his sports betting accounts. He was trying to win back the $80,000 he owed. He was chasing the loss." I closed my eyes. I could see the room, the cheap synthetic bedspread, the smell of stale tobacco and grease from the highway, the pale light of a laptop screen reflecting on my son's face as he clicked through game statistics, watching the money slip away. He had always been a boy who believed the next throw of the dice would fix the last one. "Solis's forensics unit had a digital trace on his betting accounts," Victoria continued. "The moment he logged in from the motel's Wi-Fi network, the site's security flagged the IP address. The digital pings were clean. Solis contacted the King County Sheriff, and they sent a deputy unit to verify the registration. They found the blue sedan's keys in his pocket." "Did he fight?" I asked. "No," Victoria said. "The deputies said he was sitting on the edge of the bed when they opened the door. The laptop was open, and he had less than $3,000 of the loan money left in his bag. He'd lost $47,000 in 10 days. He didn't even stand up when they put the cuffs on him. He just asked if he could call his mother." I looked out the workshop window. Marge was standing by the roses, her back to me, her hand resting on the wooden fence. "Did he call?" I asked. "No," Victoria said. "Solis has already initiated the formal extradition process under ORS 133.743. Since Roger has an active felony warrant in Oregon for first-degree forgery, identity theft, and elder abuse, the governor's official extradition warrant will be processed next week. He'll be transferred to the Marion County Jail on A Street in Salem by Wednesday afternoon." She paused, giving me a moment to process the details. "Walter, the civil case is also moving forward quickly. I've filed the formal civil complaint under ORS 124.110 for elder financial abuse, requesting triple damages. We've secured an injunction to freeze the remaining hotel accounts, though there's very little left. The bank is cooperating, and we are working with the truck lender to clear your name from the guarantor agreement." It will take time, but the paperwork is moving. Thank you, Victoria, I said. Get some sleep, Walter, she said gently. The hard part is over. I hung up the phone. I walked out of the workshop into the warm yard, the afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. I walked over to where Marge was standing and stood beside her. The air smelled of lavender and dry cedar. They arrested him in Seattle, I said. Marge didn't turn around immediately. She kept her eyes on the yellow roses, her fingers gently touching a dry leaf. He lost the money, didn't he? Most of it, I said. He was betting from a motel room. She let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders dropping slightly. I'm glad he's safe, Walter. I was terrified Solis would call and tell us they had found him in the river. Even after what he did, I didn't want him to die in the dark. He's coming back to Salem, I said. They're transferring him to the county jail next week. She turned to me then, her brown eyes still in flat. We're going to the jail, Walter. Not to bail him out, not to pay for his lawyer. But I want to look him in the eye and ask him why my mother's ring was worth less than a bet on a football game. We'll go, I said. I took her hand. It was warm now, warmed by the August sun. We walked back toward the house together, our boots quiet on the dry summer grass. The leak had been stopped, the pressure was gone, the systems had worked exactly the way the laws of the state had designed it to work. But as I opened the kitchen door, I knew that some systems are built to hold water, and some are built to hold families, and when you use the rules of the first to fix the second, the repair is always going to leave a scar. The Marion County Jail sits on A Street in downtown Salem, a gray concrete block of a building that has no architectural charm. It is a place designed to contain pressure. The lobby smells of industrial floor wax, damp raincoats, and the cold, metallic taste of nervous breathing. Marge and I arrived at 2 p.m. on Thursday. We had checked in at the front desk showing our driver's licenses and sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes. Marge sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her brown eyes fixed on the heavy security door that led to the visitation block. Her face was completely still, showing no emotion. I sat beside her in silence, the hard plastic chair cold and uncomfortable beneath me. A deputy eventually called our names and led us through two heavy steel doors that opened with a loud, mechanical buzz. The visitation room was divided by a thick panel of security glass. On our side were metal stools bolted to the floor and a row of black telephone receivers. On the other side was a narrow corridor. We sat down. Marge picked up the black receivers, holding it to her ear before Roger even walked into the room. I sat next to her, picking up the second receiver. A few seconds later, the door on the opposite side opened, and a deputy led Roger in. He was wearing the bright orange jumpsuit of a county inmate. His hands were cuffed in front of his waist, and he walked with a slow, shuffling gait because of the heavy steel chain between his ankles. It clinked against the concrete floor with every step. He looked incredibly pale, without his blazer, without the expensive watch, and with his hair unwashed and flat. He looked smaller than 35. He looked like the boy who used to hide in the basement when he was in trouble. He sat on the metal stool across from Marge. The deputy unlocked his handcuffs, leaving his ankles chained, and stepped back to stand by the door. Roger slowly reached out and picked up his receiver. His hand was trembling. "Mom," he said. His voice came through the earpiece, thin and tinny, vibrating with a high nervous frequency. "Dad, thank you for coming. I didn't think you would." Marge didn't say anything immediately. She looked at him through the glass, her brown eyes completely flat and serious. "We didn't come to help you, Roger," Marge said. Her voice was quiet, but it was the school secretary voice that brooked no argument. "We came to look at you." Roger's eyes filled with tears, and he looked down at the metal counter. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. The hotel, I was just under so much pressure. Those people, they were going to hurt me. They were standing outside the building. They were calling Clara's office. You forged your father's name." "Roger," Marge said, ignoring his excuses. "You took out a loan on the Delmare house. You signed a paper saying your father was losing his mind. And you took out a policy on his life, waiting for his heart to stop. I wasn't going to let him die." Roger sobbed, his voice breaking through the receiver. "I swear to you, Mom, it was just a paper requirement for the creditors. I just needed the document to show them I had assets." I was going to cancel it the moment the hotel refinanced. And my mother's ring? Marge asked. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of a stone dropping into a well. Why was my mother's diamond worth less than a bet on a football game? Roger pressed his forehead against the security glass, a wet smear appearing on the pane. I didn't want to sell it, Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. I was desperate. The electric company was going to cut the lights at the hotel, and if the lights went out, the city inspectors would know the building was closed. I took the diamond out of the setting. I sold the stone to Burnside and Sons. But I kept the band. I hid it in the nightstand at Del Mar because I couldn't bear to sell the gold with her initials carved inside. I replaced the stone with cheap glass, hoping you wouldn't notice until I could buy the diamond back. I leaned closer to the glass. Roger, I said, my voice flat, the diamond was sold 3 months ago. The money is gone. The hotel is gone. Your wife has filed for divorce. Clara's father is taking out a second mortgage to pay for Clara's legal fees and Brenda's fines because Brenda is a felon now because of you. Roger looked at me, his eyes red and wild. Dad, please. You have the money. You have the pension. If you go to Victoria, if you tell the DA you won't testify, they'll drop the charges. We can handle this as a family. I'll pay you back. I'll get a job. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, don't let me go to prison. Marge slowly shook her head. No, Roger, she said. We're not going to the DA. We're not paying for your lawyer. The state has its process, and you are going to go through it. You are going to stand in that court. You are going to plead guilty, and you are going to serve whatever time the judge gives you. Mom, please, he screamed, his face pressing hard against the glass. I can't survive in here. You don't know what it's like. You built the system. Roger, Marge said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You turned the valves. You checked the paperwork. Now you have to live with the pressure. She slowly set the receiver back in the metal cradle. She stood up, her hand smoothing the front of her jacket. She looked at Roger one last time through the glass, her brown eyes quiet, and then she turned and walked toward the security door. I looked at my son. He was holding the receiver, his mouth open, screaming silent words against the glass. I picked up my phone, set it back in the cradle, and stood up. We'll see you at the hearing, Roger, I said. I turned and walked out of the room, the heavy steel doors buzzing behind us as we stepped back into the corridor. I left my son sitting in the orange jumpsuit, clutching the receiver, chained to the concrete floor of a room he had built himself with every lie he chose to tell. The Marion County Courthouse on High Street is a 3-story brick building constructed in the 1950s. It has the heavy oak doors, high ceilings, and tall windows that make every sound echo. The air inside is cool, smelling of old paper, damp marble, and the dry, mechanical hum of institutional ventilation. Marge and I sat in the second row of the gallery in courtroom 3B. Victoria Sinclair sat next to us, her leather briefcase open on her lap, a quiet presence of legal authority. Dennis Vance sat on my other side, his broad shoulders filling the wooden bench, his jaw set in a hard, protective line. Behind us, the gallery was mostly empty, save for a few court observers and 2 reporters from the local Salem paper. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Helen Harris took the bench. She was a sharp-eyed woman of 60, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she ran her court with the clinical efficiency of a steam turbine. State of Oregon versus Roger Walter Harrington, the bailiff announced. The side door opened and a deputy led Roger in. He was wearing a dark blue suit that was slightly too large for him, a suit George Wexler had brought to the jail earlier that week. Roger's hands were cuffed in front of his waist, but his legs were free of chains for the court appearance. He kept his eyes on the floor as he walked to the defense table, never once looking back at the gallery. His public defender, a young, tired-looking man named Marcus Taylor, stood beside him. On the other side of the room, the deputy district attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Sarah Jenkins, laid out the state's evidence on the prosecution table. Your Honor, Jenkins said, her voice clear and carrying through the high-ceilinged room, the state is prepared to show a pattern of deliberate, coordinated fraud. We have the digital files from Reyes and Harmon showing the templates used for the forged power of attorney. We have the video footage from the neighbor's security system showing the defendant intercepting the victim's mail. We have the sworn affidavit from the co-conspirator Clara Wexler, and the confession of Brenda Keene regarding the fraudulent notary stamp. The state is charging the defendant with 1 count of identity theft under ORS 165-800, 3 counts of forgery in the first degree under ORS 165-013, and elder financial abuse under ORS 124-11. Marcus Taylor stood up, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, my client is prepared to waive the preliminary reading of the charges. We are currently in discussions with the District Attorney's Office regarding a potential plea agreement. My client has no prior criminal record, and he has cooperated with the investigators since his arrest in Seattle." "The state's offer is flat, Your Honor," Jenkins countered immediately. "We are recommending a sentence of 72 months in the custody of the Oregon Department of Corrections, with no opportunity for early release under the state's sentencing guidelines for elder financial abuse. The level of planning, the forgery of a father's signature to secure $50,000 in debt, and the unauthorized life insurance policy demonstrate a severe threat to the community." Judge Harris looked down from her bench, her sharp eyes scanning the defense table, then Roger's face. Roger sat perfectly still, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched. He looked like a man who had run out of exit routes. "Mr. Taylor," Judge Harris said, her voice cool and heavy, "I will set the formal trial date for October 12th. If you and the state reach an agreement before then, you may petition the court for a change of plea hearing. In the meantime, the defendant will remain in the custody of the Marion County Jail. Bail remains set at $250,000. With a single, sharp rap of her gavel, she moved to the next case. The deputy tapped Roger's shoulder. Roger stood up slowly, the deputy latching the handcuffs back around his wrists with a dry, metallic click. As he was led toward the side door, he flicked his eyes toward our row. He looked at Marge. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Marge didn't move. She sat with her back straight, her brown eyes watching him until the heavy wooden door shut behind him. We walked out of the courtroom into the wide, marble hallway. As we approached the stairs, I saw George Wexler standing by the window. He looked exhausted, his face gray, his eyes bloodshot. He was clutching a small plastic bag in his hand. When he saw us, he walked over, his steps heavy. "Walter," George said, his voice rough and low. "Marge." I nodded to him. "George, Clara is doing okay," George said quietly, looking down at his boots. "Her license is gone, but the DA is dropping the criminal conspiracy charges because of the affidavit. She's moving back to Portland next month to live with her sister. She wants to start over." He paused, looking at Marge with a look of deep, painful apology. "Marge, I went to the Delmare house yesterday with the sheriff's deputies to finish clearing out Roger's things. The nightstand in the guest bedroom, we moved it to clean the baseboards. We found this taped to the back of the drawer." He held out the small plastic bag. Inside was the gold band of Marge's mother's ring. The diamond was gone, the claws of the setting bent and empty, but the yellow gold was clean. Through the plastic, I could see the tiny, vintage carving on the inside of the band. "EM to MH 1945. Marge reached out. Her fingers were trembling as she took the bag from George's hand. She pulled the gold band out of the plastic and held it in her palm. The empty setting caught the courthouse light, cold and hollow. For the first time since this system had begun to fail, Marge let out a dry, gasping sob. She pressed the gold band to her lips, her shoulders shaking as she turned her head against my shoulder. I pulled her close, my arm tight around her back, and let her cry in the middle of the marble hallway. George stood in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his family's ruin. "Thank you, George," I said quietly. "I'm sorry, Walter," George whispered, his voice cracking. "I really am." He turned and walked toward the exit, his boots squeaking on the polished stone. Marge held the empty ring in her fist, her tears wet against my neck. The diamond was gone, sold to pay a dead hotel's utility bill, but the gold was back. The foundation was still there, bent and empty, but clean. By the last week of September, the Salem mornings had gone cold and crisp, the leaves on the street maples turning a sharp, bright orange before the heavy fall rain started. The change of plea hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Marge and I sat in the same gallery seats in courtroom 3B. On her finger, Marge was wearing her mother's ring again. We had taken the empty gold band to a local jeweler on Liberty Street 2 weeks earlier. The jeweler had carefully straightened the bent claws of the setting and set a modest, clean new diamond into the original vintage gold mounting. It wasn't the same stone her mother had worn, and it didn't pretend to be. But it caught the pale light of the autumn morning with a quiet, steady shine. It was a repair that acknowledged the break. Roger stood at the defense table, wearing the dark blue suit again. He looked thinner than he had in August, his collar looking loose around his neck. His attorney, Marcus Taylor, stood close to him, holding a 3-page plea agreement. "Your Honor, Sarah Jenkins," the deputy district attorney said, standing at her table. "The state has reached a negotiated resolution with the defense. The defendant is pleading guilty to 1 count of identity theft, a Class C felony under ORS 165.800, and 2 counts of forgery in the first degree, a Class B felony under ORS 165.01. In exchange for the plea, the state is dismissing the remaining conspiracy and civil abuse charges. We are recommending a sentence of 60 months in the custody of the Oregon Department of Corrections, followed by 36 months of post-prison supervision." Judge Harris adjusted her glasses, looking down at the defense table, her face carrying the dry, clinical neutrality of the bench. "Mr. Harrington, did you read and sign this petition to enter a plea of guilty?" Roger reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he touched the paper. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the energy and desperation he had shown in the jail. It was the voice of a man who had accepted the flow of the current. "Do you understand that by pleading guilty, you are waiving your right to a jury trial? Your right to confront witnesses, and your right to appeal this court's sentence?" "I do, Your Honor." "And how do you plead to the charge of identity theft on March 14th? Judge Harris asked, her voice clear and precise. "Guilty," Roger said. "And how do you plead to the charge of forgery in the first degree on March 15th? "Guilty." Judge Harris took a slow breath, writing on her pad. She looked up, her gray eyes resting on our row in the gallery, then back at Roger. "The court accepts the pleas of guilty. The defendant's actions represent a calculated, systematic exploitation of parental trust. Forgery of a signature to secure $50,000 in debt is a serious crime. Doing so while fabricating a story about a father's cognitive decline to secure a life insurance policy is a profound betrayal of the family structure." She picked up her pen. "Under the terms of the agreement, I sentence you to 60 months at the Oregon State Penitentiary. You are ordered to pay full restitution of $50,000 to the lenders, and a civil judgment of $12,000 is entered against you for the value of the stolen property. You are remanded to the custody of the sheriff for transfer." With a single heavy rap of her gavel, she stood up and walked out of the courtroom. The case was officially closed. The court paperwork was clean. The deputy stepped forward and placed the handcuffs around Roger's wrists. Roger stood at the table for a long moment, looking down at the empty chairs. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked at us. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just looked at Marge, his eyes resting on her hand where the new diamond caught the light. Marge looked back at him, her face calm and serious. She didn't turn away. She watched him walk through the side door, the heavy oak panel closing behind him with a dull, hollow thud. Dennis Vance stood up beside me, letting out a long, slow breath that sounded like a sigh. 5 years, he said, his voice quiet and low in the empty courtroom. "It's a long time to spend in State Street, Walter, but he earned every single day of it." "It is," I said, standing beside Marge. Victoria Sinclair packed her files into her leather case, closing the latch with a clean, dry click. "The civil judgments are secure, Walter. The truck lender has officially released you from the guarantor agreement, and the Delmare deed is clean. The system has been restored." We walked out of the courthouse into the bright September afternoon. The air was cool, carrying the smell of dry leaves and pine needle mulch. We walked down the steps toward my truck. Marge walked slowly, her hand resting on my arm, the new diamond catching the pale sun. "Let's drive past the Delmare house, Walter," Marge said quietly as we got into the truck. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I want to see it," she said. "Now that the deed is clean." I started the truck's engine and drove north through the city toward Delmare Street. The house sat quiet under the shade of the maples. The blue sedan gone from the driveway, the lawn mowed by a local service I'd hired. It looked like any other house on a quiet Salem street, a system of wood, glass, and pipes that was currently empty, waiting for new tenants. Marge looked at the empty front porch, the porch where Roger had stood in the cold rain and locked us out 2 months ago. It looked smaller now, stripped of the anger that had filled that night. She reached down, took my hand, and squeezed it, her fingers dry and warm. "We'll rent it out next month, Walter," she said. "A nice young family. Someone who needs a clean start, we will," I said. I put the truck in gear and drove back toward Creekside Drive. The sun was warming the windshield, and the road ahead was dry. The repair was finished, the pressure was gone, the line was clean. It had cost us our son, but we had saved our lives, and as the truck turned onto our street, I knew that was the only compliance report that mattered. By the middle of November, the heavy Salem winter rains had returned in earnest, soaking our back garden beds and turning the quiet creek behind our house into a rushing, muddy brown torrent. The warmth of the summer was a distant memory, replaced by the gray, wet chill of an Oregon autumn. The house at 412 Delmare Street was no longer empty. We had rented it to a young couple, David and Sarah Miller. David was a history teacher at Sprague High School, and Sarah worked part-time at the Salem Public Library. They had a 3-year-old daughter named Lily, whose bright yellow raincoat and red boots were now a familiar sight on the gravel driveway. The sweet sound of a young child laughing in the backyard had washed away the cold, silent panics that Roger and Clara had left behind. The house was a home again, functioning under a clean lease, with the rent deposits arriving precisely on the first of every month. I was in my garage on a cold Thursday afternoon, cleaning the small steel bearings on my old table saw, the metal dry and cold in my grease-stained fingers. The rain was drumming a steady, familiar beat on the metal roof, a sound that usually helped me focus. The side door opened and Marge walked in. She was holding a small white envelope. She didn't have her gardening gloves on, and her hands looked small and dry. She stood by the workbench, looking at the envelope for a long time before she held it out to me. "It came in the mail today," Marge said. Her voice was quiet, lacking the flat, sharp edge of anger that had defined the summer. I wiped my greasy hands on a shop rag and took the envelope. In the top left corner was a printed return address: Oregon State Penitentiary, 2605 State Street, Salem, Oregon. Below it was a 7-digit inmate number, followed by the name Roger W. Harrington. I set the bearings down. "Do you want to read it?" I asked. "I want you to open it," she said, sitting on the wooden stool by my workbench. I slid my finger under the seal, pulling out a single sheet of lined yellow paper. The handwriting was Roger's, but it wasn't the rushed, messy scrawl of the note he'd left in the blue sedan. The letters were printed carefully, block by block, like a safety report. "Dear Mom and Dad," I read the letter aloud in the quiet garage, keeping my voice steady against the drum of the rain. "I've been here for 6 weeks now. They have me assigned to the laundry facility. It's hot, heavy work, lifting wet sheets from the washers and feeding them into the industrial dryers. We work 8-hour shifts, and the heat in the room is intense. But it pays 25 cents an hour, and it keeps my hands busy. The prison is very strict. Every hour is accounted for. We wake up at 5 a.m. every single morning, we eat at 6, we work until 3, and lights are out at 10 p.m. In a strange way, the structure is a relief. For the last 5 years, my life was a constant, chaotic scramble. I was always running from one bill to another, placing one bet to cover the last one, waiting for the system to collapse. I was living under a pressure I couldn't handle, and I was too proud to ask for help. I paused, looking at Marge. She was staring at the saw blade, her fingers tracing the edge of her mother's gold band. "Go on, Walter," she said quietly. I turned back to the paper. "I know what I did to you is unforgivable," the letter continued. "I forged your signatures. I stole Mom's ring. I lied to Clara and Brenda. I used your house to cover my bets. And I was waiting for Dad to die so the insurance would clear my debts. When I think about that email I sent to Philip, I feel sick. I don't recognize the person I was during those months. I was a monster, Dad. I destroyed everything because I was too weak to admit I had failed. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect you to visit. I know I have to serve my 60 months, and I will, but I wanted to say thank you. Dad, when you stood on that porch in the rain at the courthouse and told me the door wasn't closed, I didn't understand it then. I was too angry, too scared, but sitting in this cell, I realized those 3 words were the only thing that kept me from giving up completely. I am going to do the work. I am going to pay the restitution. I hope, one day, many years from now, I can earn the right to stand on your porch again. Not as a thief, but as your son. Love, Roger. The garage went quiet, save for the hum of the heater and the rain on the roof. I folded the paper, sliding it back into the envelope. Marge sat still for a long minute. A single tear ran down her cheek, catching the light before disappearing into her sweater. She looked at her hand, where the new diamond caught the light of the fluorescent tube above the workbench. "He's working the laundry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," I said. "He says the structure of the prison is a relief." "Yes, Marge. Sometimes when the pressure is too high, you need an external regulator to keep the line from bursting." She stood up, her secretary face returning, but this time it had a soft, quiet warmth at the corners of her mouth. "We're not going to write back yet, Walter. Not this month. He needs to do the hot laundry work for a while longer." "I know," I said. "But we'll keep the letter," she said, taking the white envelope from my hand. "We'll put it in the safe, with the ring." She walked back toward the house, her boots quiet on the wet gravel. I looked at the table saw, the bearings clean and ready for grease. The system was isolated. The leak was gone. The Delmare house was filled with the laughter of a child, and my wife was putting the safe away. The repair of the family structure was slow, and the scar would always be there. But the main line was holding, and as I picked up the grease gun, I knew the pressure was finally stable. By the middle of May, the Oregon spring had finally arrived in full. The long, gray stretch of winter rains had broken, leaving the Salem skies a clear, pale blue, and the rich soil in Marge's garden beds was warm, dark, and ready for planting. The hydrangeas were beginning to show their first green buds, growing thick and strong along the cedar fence line. Our lives had settled into a new, quiet rhythm, a system under stable pressure. The Delmare property was doing well. David and Sarah Miller had planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, and sometimes when Marge and I drove by, we'd see young Lily running through the garden sprinklers, her yellow raincoat replaced by a bright summer dress. The rent arrived like clockwork, but more importantly, the house carried a warmth that had been missing for years. The damage had been isolated, the lines successfully repaired, and clean new water was flowing through the pipes. Clara Wexler had officially settled down in a small apartment in Portland. She was working as a billing coordinator for a large shipping company near the Willamette River. Her legal career was finished forever, her paralegal certification officially revoked by the state bar. But George Wexler told me during a brief phone call in April that she was doing better. She was attending meetings, volunteering at a local shelter, and living a quiet, anonymous life away from the wreckage of the Copper Harbor Inn. Brenda Keene had completed her first 200 hours of community service, sweeping the long concrete walkways at the Oregon State Fairgrounds and sorting donations at a Salem food bank. She paid her fine in small monthly increments, and she and George were still together, though the quietness in their home was now permanent. The structure of their marriage had survived the fracture, but it was a system that would always carry the heavy brackets of their daughter's and son-in-law's disgrace. Every 3 months, a white envelope with the State Street return address arrived in our mailbox. Roger wrote about the books he was checking out from the prison library, mostly history and biographies, and the small savings account he was slowly building from his laundry work to begin his restitution payments. We hadn't driven down to the prison to visit him, and we hadn't called him. But 3 weeks ago, Marge had bought a postcard of the Oregon State Capitol building at the local pharmacy. On the back, she had written a single line: "The roses are blooming early this year. Take care of yourself, Mom." It was a tiny valve, open just a fraction of an inch, allowing a tiny regulated flow of contact through the steel doors. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in late May. Dennis Vance had walked over from next door, carrying a small cardboard box containing 2 cold bottles of local root beer. We sat on the porch chairs in the warm May sun, looking out at the green lawn and the yard. The air smelled of cut grass and lilac blossoms. "You see the news about the hotel building on Lancaster?" Dennis asked, taking a slow sip from his cold glass bottle. "I did," I said. "The county sold it at auction last week. A local developer is turning it into a medical supply office. The old boutique sign is already taken down." Dennis nodded slowly, looking at the grass. "Good. It was a bad structure from the start, Walter. Too much weight on a weak, shifting foundation." "It was," I said. Marge came out to the porch a few minutes later, holding a wooden tray of fresh red strawberries she'd harvested from her back garden. She sat in the middle chair between us, setting the tray on the small table. On her finger, her mother ring caught the May sun, the new diamond throwing tiny, bright flashes of white light across the wooden porch railing. She looked relaxed, her shoulders loose under her cotton blouse, her brown eyes carrying the quiet peace of a woman who had managed the crisis and returned the office to order. We sat in silence for a long time on the front porch, the three of us, listening to the sound of the wind in the maples and the distant hum of a lawnmower down the street. It was the same quiet we had shared 2 years ago, but the weight of it was different. It was the quiet of survivors, of people who had checked the seals after the line had ruptured and found that the main structure was still standing. I looked at Marge's hand, then at the garden beds where the tiny green shoots were pushing through the rich, dark soil. For 31 years I had worked for the Salem Water Authority, checking the gauges, tightening the fittings, and isolating the leaks. I had believed that safety compliance was a matter of numbers, materials, and engineering specifications. I had believed that if you followed the code, the system would never fail. But sitting on that porch in the warm, clear Salem sun, I knew I had been completely wrong about how systems work. The most complex systems we build aren't made of steel or copper, and they don't have valves you can shut down with a wrench when the pressure climbs. They are made of the people we choose to keep in our lives, the promises we make when the storm is hitting the glass, and the quiet, stubborn patience it takes to repair a break instead of walking away from the flood. Roger was serving his 60 months on State Street, lifting the wet sheets in the laundry, learning the weight of the pressure he had built himself. Clara was in Portland, starting over in the rain. Brenda was sweeping the walks at the fairgrounds. The hotel sign was gone, and the Del Mar house was filled with the laughter of a child. The system was different now, smaller and scarred. But the seals were tight, the foundation was stable, and the line was holding. I reached over on the armrest and laid my hand over Marge's fingers, feeling the cool gold of the band and the warm, dry strength of her skin. She turned her hand to lock her fingers with mine, her brown eyes meeting my eyes with a look of quiet, absolute certainty. The sun was warm on our faces, the grass was green, and for the first time in a very long time, I knew the structural pressure in our lives was exactly where it was supposed to be.